Hello and welcome to The Price of Time, the show where we explore the defining moments that made people who they are today and the impact of those moments over time. Here's your host, Luke Tatum. Hello once again and welcome back to The Price of Time. My name is Luke Tatum. This week we are joined by Whitney Popa. Whitney is a writer, editor, and consultant for little companies with big dreams. A born communicator, she connects people through stories. She believes strongly in many things, including expensive sweatsuits, off-road vehicles, good books, and bad TV. With her 2 cats, 2 kids, and 1 husband, Whitney splits her time between Edmonds and Waterville, Washington. Her first book, A Wave Called Grief, is out now, and we're going to learn more about what that's about as we get into the episode. So, Whitney, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Luke. It's a great intro. We were joking. Who wrote that? I wrote that.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm glad you did, right? A lot of times I'll get Bob is the author of this book, and like that's it. That's the whole bio. And so it's like, okay, well, tell me more. So you did a very, very excellent job kind of teeing that up, and that was wonderful. Of course, it sounds like we're going to get into some pretty sad stuff here today. At least for part of the episode. But my hope is that you've been able to find some strength and find some things, from your experiences, and that we're going to have a positive note maybe to end on by the end of the show. So why don't you just maybe start by telling us kind of what is your one defining moment that we're going to hone in on this week?
Sure. Yeah, what's funny about this is when I first graduated college, I taught the SAT, and that was one of the prompts that my students would have to write on, talk about a moment of adversity or a moment where your life was completely different than it is now. And they really struggled with that. Young kids don't always have these things to think about, but I believe everyone does. And they can feel smaller, but they are super defining. They don't have to be as big as mine. I mean, I've had many, but one of my biggest is the day that I learned that my dad was diagnosed with brain cancer. And that's when I was in my early 20s, and I'd moved to the big city. I lived in Seattle, and my mom called me at work. I worked for a big PR agency, and she said, "Are you sitting?" And I was just like, annoyed, as one is with their mother when they're in their 20s, like, just tell me what you're trying to say. And then she told me, and he was in an ambulance coming over the mountains that night they lived in a small town on the other side of the mountains in Washington. We're kind of split between one side of the state and the other by a mountain range, and put him in an ambulance, and he was in Seattle and getting consulted with doctors here by that evening. And I was at Safeway buying my mom People magazine and Wheat Thins, and wondering what to say to the cashier when she asked me how my day was going. What do you tell someone on the worst day of your life? So it was really that moment, more than any other thing that followed it, including his death, that changed everything for me.
Gosh, yeah. I mean, that's not a good phone call, right? And looking back now, do you wish you were sitting? Did you sit down for that news? I mean, do you remember?
No, I don't. I don't wish I was sitting. I don't even wish that I was more patient with her. It kind of, no regrets. It kind of is. It all panned out the way that it was meant to. And, I guess I do sometimes think that you could be nicer to your mom when you're in your 20s, but I don't like when people bury the lead. I mean, I was in PR.
Yeah,
so.
Sure. No, I totally respect that. Now, so, I mean, obviously you mentioned that he ended up passing away and all that. So was this a long, long process? Was it just a struggle for years, or what kind of, what was that experience like from that point?
Yeah, he was a parks director. That was his last job before he retired. To expedite that whole story, so he had brain cancer, a grade 4 glioblastoma, one about the size of a golf ball in the speech center of his brain, and then a smaller one on his brainstem that was inoperable. They got the smaller golf ball size one out, and then he went through the whole chemo radiation thing at the time. So he died, that would mean his diagnosis was like 14 years ago. There's always a lot of advancements in these things, which is super exciting. But at the time, the lifespan wasn't very long, maybe a year after diagnosis. He lived about 2 years after he was diagnosed, and there were a few things that we did to have him meet with other doctors who had more advanced technologies and looking into studies and all of that. He actually went back to work for a few months before he retired after he recovered from his surgery. And he really needed that. And it's, I mean, when you decide on your own to retire, that's one thing, but to have this diagnosis and then be forced into retirement, it's a lot to handle mentally. So I was glad that he was able to go back to work for a little bit and then make the decision to retire, because he actually was at work when my mom told him, you need to go walk yourself to the emergency room, because he kept losing his train of thought. He was on the phone with the mayor, and he didn't have any seizures. A lot of people with this disease have seizures. He just completely lost his train of thought, and he indicated to her this wasn't the first time. So in that 2 years, it was just really hard. And once he was on hospice, then everything kind of moved really quickly. We had him in a care home, and I was grateful that he was in Seattle for a lot of that. And they had rented an apartment, and I was able to visit him pretty much every day if I wanted to. I still kept my job. I was working. And the reason that I wanted that to be my moment was that it put so much of my life in perspective in my 20s, when I could have just been climbing the ladder, burned myself out, followed a lot of things that I thought I should do as far as what my life should look like, who I should be impressing. And as much as I would rather have my dad here, I am so grateful that I was able to see what life is, and at that age, versus I could be a completely different person and be managing my life so differently had I not had that experience.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so tell me, I guess, more about what your life was like, before that fateful day, that phone call, the where we started. Um, I mean, you're kind of alluding to it, right? You're just kind of climbing the ladder and doing what people do, trying to advance their careers and whatnot. But in your own words, just kind of more about what was that? What were your focuses? What were your priorities? And then we can talk about how things change.
Yeah, I was a star student my whole life. I was always very externally validated. I am an only child. I love to learn. I love to read. Obviously, I'm a writer, and I was always performing for others in the sense of I had to get the A. I've gotten on transcripts 2 Bs in my entire life. And that was very upsetting for me. I was on every list. I graduated magna cum laude. I was that person. And so I went about my life that way. I just got a job out of college, and I wanted it to be an impressive job. I've only ever had very impressive sounding corporate jobs, and I wondered why I was so miserable in all of them until I figured out that I was the common denominator. And because my dad was, his degrees are in recreation, that was his whole life. Play was his whole life. And so he always told me, make time for play. And I was like, all right, whatever. Like, I'm over here trying to get a promotion and make more money and get to that next level. And I was just miserable, like burning myself out in every direction. And yet, when I would tell people what my jobs were, they were like, oh my gosh, that's so cool. And I would get all of this congratulations all the time. So the world was saying to me, good job, good work. And I was just feeling so empty. And even when he got diagnosed, when I told my team at work that he was on hospice, they called me the next day and they moved me off the team and then they said to me, this is for you to spend more time with your family. But because I was such a performer, I felt like they were rejecting me, that was I not pulling my weight because I had this thing I was carrying. And there was never a conversation. I do wish that we could have had a conversation where they would ask me, what do you want? Because everybody grieves differently. And that process started the second I got that phone call for me as far as grief goes. But I was able to see this is not it, like, and he was a great model for me too, because his job as a parks director, he rode his bike to work. He would come home for lunch and make himself a sausage and then ride his bike back. Even when I was growing up, he would go on runs in the middle of the day with his coworkers, just very action forward as far as taking care of himself, his body. And I got so down the hole of like, what's the next shiny object? What's the next reward for me, that I didn't think about myself. And having him and then my team shoving me off so that I could be with him according to them, I was like, all right, I'll take you up on this. And I just sat with him and realized this is what I want. I want to be able to have my financial independence and be with my family. And I didn't see a lot of that existing at that time. And eventually I created it, but the wheels were completely in motion at that point. And he would be really adamant with me too, even before he stopped being able to speak, because they kind of get like Alzheimer's at the end. He would say, just don't ever lose your writing. And I, would say, okay, yeah, Dad. And I didn't know what that meant then, or I wanted to keep my promise, but I didn't know what that was going to look like. And so it took me probably 5 more years before I really broke out of it. But that was the beginning of me looking at my life and how I want it to feel versus how I want it to look.
Yeah, yeah. Wow, wow. So, I mean, it is a big shift then. And, something that I noticed as you were laying that all out, you mentioned that your dad got to go back to work, right, for a brief period there. And because, you get that kind of diagnosis, and your livelihood and like what you're used to and your routines and stuff more or less taken away from you. And that was hard for him, right? And then you also said that more or less the same thing happened to you, right? You were moved on to a different team and they told you, well, this is for you. It's, you know, because of the situation, but you didn't pick that. You didn't choose that situation, and that's hard, right? So it sounds like y'all had a lot of things in common as far as, your personality towards those types of things. And it's very human. It's very human to not want to have other people, take away your autonomy and those kind of things. I mean, that's why I do what I do. And that's kind of why we're out in the middle of nowhere instead of in a big city and stuff, because I don't like rules and standing in lines and being told how to live my life, and that kind of stuff. And so, I'm very, very much right there with you. As far as your path after, I guess, so you were able to spend time with your dad, and then eventually he passed. And so I know that you've written this book, but you said just now that it was a few years before you were able really to move on and kind of learn all the lessons you needed to learn. So what was that like? I mean, how many years was it before you started writing the book? When did your book come out? I don't know any of those things. So
Mm-hmm. I used to get frustrated too. I had these timelines for myself. We all have goals. And I wanted to have a book published, a novel, preferably by the time I was 35. My book came out in March of this year. So I was 37. I missed my deadline. And that is something that I learned along the way, to just give myself a lot of grace for. Things will come as they're meant to. And I've learned a lot of the writing process as well, of even with novels. My novel's still not done, but it's the characters trusting you and coming through you and really giving them that. I thought at first that was kind of cheesy, but now I really love it because I want them to trust me. I want to be in that place where I can really do justice to their story. To go back a little bit, and I love that parallel that you made, that the first thing I did was, the job I was in was doing PR for Xbox on behalf of Microsoft, and I was in that company for about 5 years. And it's hard to be in PR, especially when you're young. And as much as I support video games and what they did for me. That wasn't one of my biggest passions. You know, I said sweatsuits. I love sweatsuits. I live in Seattle, so like, you know, outside of tech, I really didn't want to do a ton of tech. And I had been applying to Nordstrom for years. So after my dad died, I was still at the PR agency and I wanted Nordstrom, and that finally happened. So that was a big, exciting thing for me to go, like in our world, we call it going client side and being the client at Nordstrom. And I needed to go through this list that I had made in my cubicle at that first job of all the jobs I'm going to have before I become a consultant. And that was being at the agency, being the client, going to a startup, and then becoming. And that's just what I knew my path would be. And it took me, I think my dad died in 2012, and I didn't start my small agency until 17. So it was another 5 years. And that was pretty magical too, because the client found me. And I was super pregnant with my first child. We had been touring daycares. Nearby, none of the math made sense of how I could commute and drop him off. I didn't have any leave. I had 6 weeks unpaid. I couldn't, I didn't know how it was going to come together. And like, a lot of people have business plans and they plan for these things. I kind of planned in my subconscious, I guess, but I never had like this is how I'm going to start my company and this is the money I need. I had two goals. I said, make enough money on my own that I would cover half of my salary because that's what I would be giving to a daycare, and I can hang out with my son, then I will be happy. And I believe the experiences in my career leading up to that, I had the knowledge and experience to get a few clients. And that first client just found me, and they were a very cool company. It's a cooking company called Sur La Table. They're based in Seattle too. And
I'm very familiar, actually. We'll have to talk more about this. Yeah.
yeah, so they just dropped into my lap like friend of a friend. I had barely even talked about that I was thinking about maybe going freelance. And it was all kind of meant to be because I wouldn't have done it on my own without something presenting. And I always like to tell people that because I have to do, like, it had to happen backwards for me. I couldn't just be like, I'm starting a company now. And I registered an LLC because they said that's the way that their budget worked, that how they had to pay someone. So I was like, all right, I'm a business now. And this was the name that was available. And then after that, I had to get brave enough. I still had to do business type writing, which was externally validating until I did a lot of inner work so that some of the personal stories that I wanted to tell felt safe with me, and I felt safe sharing them because it's so vulnerable. It's a huge, like, it's one thing to be paid and be told this is your scope and this is what you give us, and have that exchange and love my clients and all of that. But to have personal work out into the world, like, I have an English degree and I hated sitting in those rooms critiquing each other's stories. So the little book that I created, I feel like, again, wasn't something that I planned. I didn't sit down and say, this is the book I'm going to write. I had been working on this novel for like 10 years, and that felt too big and scary, just like starting my company. And then this little booklet that is literally a pocketbook. It's a pocketbook size book. It's 42 pages. It's a story about a woman, a metaphor for grief of this wave, a very kind of on the nose metaphor, a wave called grief, where she is in her day trying to resist this wave of these big feelings that are hard for her to manage. And it's the way that I describe it is it's beautiful, and it's what I needed when I was dealing with all of that. I was never going to go to a grief group at a hospital or in a church basement. I felt so isolated and I didn't know where to go and what to turn to. And if I had been able to just have this little tool literally in my back pocket, it would have helped me when the anxiety got really big, or when I felt like all of my friends were partying and having fun and not thinking of big life things the way that I was. And I just felt, I think it just felt safe coming through me. And it was to show me that you can do this in a bigger way, but we're going to start here so that you can feel safe with something small. And I get kind of concerned, like, I don't want to be the grief girl, but I do feel like it is such a universal experience and something where I can really serve others by giving them this tool, that I think it's such an important conversation and something that I just had nowhere to turn. And even when my dad died, we got flowers and cards, but where do those end up? I want to be able to pass something forward. The best thing that people did, even if they didn't know him, they would send me poems that were meaningful to them, or the people who had stories of him, like with him, that I didn't know about, their relationship with him. Those were the most impactful things for me. So the way that I wrote this book, there's a few little anecdotes where you can see that she is not, and I don't want to spoil the whole thing. I mean, it is only 42 pages. It's like a 2-minute read, but there is a moment in the book that was really important to me to share, that it's a little subtle, where she's trying to find a surfboard to be able to ride this wave, to access her tools. And she's in the surf shop, and there are other people around her, and they all look different than she does. And that shows her, you are not alone in this, because we feel we are so alone. And so much through that process. Like, the second I got that phone call, I was looking around at all my friends and colleagues like, you don't get it. You have no perspective the way that I do. And that's a really big and scary feeling. So to have that moment in the book was really important to me, that you can see there are other people here like you, and just comfort in that. You don't have to speak to them. You don't have to go to the grief group if you don't want to, or you're not ready, or that's not for you. But you can know that this is not just your experience, and that's pretty powerful.
Yeah, there is a couple of episodes that have already been recorded, for this show that, well, let me back up. Originally, when I conceptualized this show, I thought, oh, we're going to have, oh, I read this amazing book and, it changed my life. And, oh, I read this article and it changed my life. And I saw this, TED talk and it changed my life. Like, I thought that was going to be what every episode was. And then a lot of the initial people that reached out, and, I've been very, very thankful for how many people have said, oh, wow, that's a cool concept for a show I'd love to be on. But a lot of the initial people were like, hey, it was, my dad passed away, or, my child passed away, or, like some of these grief stories. And, so there's definitely a bigger network out there, people that have gone through this type of thing recently or in the more distant past. And, it's still kind of a defining thing. And I appreciate that you said you didn't want to be the grief girl, and kind of like that's who you are, but it also can really help people to find the path, to know that there are people like that. Right. So it's important. And I'm very surprised that you said your book is very short, and so I expected, right, I didn't know anything going into this. I expected it was going to be, 150 pages, 200 pages, like a telling of your tale, but it's more allegorical, metaphorical, and that kind of stuff. And that's very cool. So is your vision for it to be with you, to just have it with you at all times and just say, kind of like an exercise that you would work through almost? That's the idea?
My vision, and my son he just turned 7, but when he was 6, they have to read for school 20 minutes a day. And when it arrived, I had him read it to me, and he understood the concept. So my intention is that it can help people as young as 5 or 6 and as old as 106 be able to feel like not only are they not alone if they're grieving, but that they can support somebody else who is, because it's so awkward we don't know what to say. I don't know what to say even to people who are going through something big, but now I know I have something I can give them that says to them, like my best friend said to me, I don't know what to say to you, And I said, the fact that you even recognize this, that you said anything, that's what matters to me. That you like, there's so many people that are uncomfortable with it and they want to make it go away because they're uncomfortable. So they'll like, even my family, they wouldn't talk about my dad because they didn't want to upset me or whatever. Whereas I just wanted to tell stories about him all the time. And so my intention with the book is, even if you want to throw it against the wall because you don't want to hear it that day, you're just sad, that is a tool for you to use your anger to throw the book against the wall. But you can pack it in your back pocket. You can throw it in a bag. You can bring it with you or to somebody very easily and discreetly. I can show it on the screen right now. It's just a tiny little, and it fits in my back jeans pocket. I have a picture of me like sliding it into the pocket because I want it to be this little tool. And, honestly, your brain gets so full too. Like a lot of us, I don't need a how-to guide on grief. That would be presumptuous and just impossible. And some of us want to intellectualize it. I want to intellectualize a lot of things. I'm a STAR student, like I said. But for this, just having, like, being able to be in the feeling of it and know this woman isn't me, but she could be me, is what I wanted to give to other people. And so I would love to see it be a part of, funeral homes, grief camps. The conversation is getting so much bigger. Have social workers have it, therapists, anybody who wants to be able to provide a tool that isn't just like, this is how you should manage your life in this moment. It's more of like, oh, this woman understands what it feels like to not want to feel bad and to resist it, and then ultimately figure out, okay, what kind of tools can I access today?
Yeah, and I'm glad you said that it would be presumptuous to try to write like a grief handbook or something like that, because there's so many dimensions to that kind of situation. There's well, how are we going to pay the bills? He was the one that earned all the money. There's all these things. And for you to go through and try to tackle every single one of those things in like a manual style, like a technical writing project, that would be, I mean, no one would read it. No one would read that. It's like, well, first of all, half the book doesn't apply to me. And second of all, it's, just a huge insurmountable wall of text about probably the most depressing thing, right? And so it's, that there's no market for that. It's a non-starter. You can't do that. And so, I mean, my company, we're a life insurance agency, right? We talk to people a lot about how to use life insurance to do other things, right? In the non specifically life insurance kind of mechanisms of that, and like how you can use it to help yourself get out of debt and things like that. But at the end of the day, it is a death benefit, right? It's like that financial angle, but it's only one of those pieces. And so, I tell my agents and I tell my clients, like, if something happens to Mr. Anderson or whoever, right? Then we'll be there, barring some disaster. Like, we'll be there with the check, at the funeral. We'll cover that. Like, we can't make it all better, but we can make that a little better, right? So you have room and space to grieve and stuff. And so, that's very important to me. But yeah, I can't make it, I can't make it go away. I can't make those feelings go away. And so we just focus on the one thing that we can do. And so your book is very, very important in that. And we should probably talk more, even after the episode, and kind of talk about maybe some ideas, some things that you might be able to get that into. And do you have like bulk ordering? I mean, for things like that? Okay, great. That's wonderful. So you're thinking ahead.
Yep. Yeah, I'd love to be at conferences and I want to help people with this in a way that just feels like a hug.
Yeah, that's a big deal. That's a big deal. Because, and I'm glad that you said we're very much on the same page. I'm glad that you said that your friend, didn't know what to tell you, right? And it's like, you just want to talk about your dad, right? Like in the moment. And so the thing you can do is to listen, right? Let them talk about whoever's been lost. And that's, you don't have to say anything, right? It's just somebody you want to get that out, and talk about the life that's now missing, you know? It's, yeah, so you get it. I mean, I know you get it. And it's great that your book is able to communicate those things. So it's been some years. Your book has been out. I'm sorry, your book came out
in March.
in
So
March, right?
it's a little baby
Right,
still.
right. Okay, so still very early on. So you're still finding, where else it could all fall in, the roles it could play for people and things. Have you thought about grief groups? Have you talked to, I mean, how's your experience been since the book has been out? Has it been a success? Have you been struggling with that, finding the right groups for it to be in? Like, what's it been?
So I have that background in PR, and I've done a lot of events, and it's in 4 local shops in the town that I live in. And so this summer, where my client load is a little lighter, I'm taking it on the road. I'm co-hosting a grief group in Boise, which is where I went to high school, Boise, Idaho. And I have a lot of grief around that place because it was a really hard time in my life. And so I'm going back with the book to redefine my relationship with Idaho. And it's helping me a ton too. I get out of my own way, and I've been to a couple conferences, and I'm being super intentional about it too. Like, you could probably relate for your company as well. Like, I have the capability to come up with some mail merges, buy some lists, and just blast this out into the universe and see what happens. That's not what I want. I want to handpick and reach out to each person personally, whether that's in person or through email, to say, this is something I think could help your customer or people you serve, and this is how. And I don't want it to be, I mean, I would love for it to be a worldwide phenomenon, right? But I don't want it to be through gross measures that are just like, let me automate something because we live in a digital world. Like, my word of the year is analog. And what I mean by that is like putting analog and digital together in ways that are meaningful and impactful. Like, I still want to be in front of people. What's cool is I don't want to be in church basements still, but I love the way that the world is really embracing grief and mental health in general. And a colleague of mine found this grief group at a yoga studio in Boise. So I will be doing that. And then I'm going to a writers conference in Sun Valley right after. And I'm going to have some copies with me, and hoping, if it comes up, I'm not there to make sales. I'm there to learn about writing. But if it is something that comes up in conversation, I want to be ready to hand over copies to people or have them pay me on my little scanny thingy, because I would like it to afford itself too. So I would say, for me, how you define success is all sorts of different ways. It it's on its way to being financially successful. It is personally very successful for me in like this heart soul feeling. And I'm continuing to push it forward. And I reading this Wayne Dyer book where he talked about his first book. He quit his job as a professor. He's one of like an amazing spiritual thinker, and was an author for Hay House eventually. And his first book, he wanted it to be something, and the publisher wasn't pushing it as much as he wanted it to go. So he took a year, or he quit his job as a professor at a college, and he took his family on the road for a year, just driving the book around and taking it. And that's really helpful perspective for me, of like, you see these really amazing, fancy people. Robin Sharma is similar, Louise Hay, all these super amazing spiritual leaders, and they went out and they hoofed it. And I will hoof it. I will do whatever it takes to get it into the right hands in a really one-to-one impactful way, without getting all like, I need to hit as many people at once, like via email. I'm just like very sensitive about cold emails, especially given my experience in PR and pitching. I'm just super about that intentional. We had terms for it in the PR agency, like the kind of a gunshot approach to it, where you just blast everything out. And this is too special to do that. So that's why it's in the back of my mind.
I totally agree with that. That's a really funny thing to have in common because it's very, very rare, right? Because in our business, I mean, financial advising, that kind of stuff, it's a very one-to-one relationship kind of thing, or one to two. There's a lot of like married couples and things that we'll sit down with. And it's it's about that relationship, And so, yeah, I mean, when my book came out, which was December of 22, I was just at the computer on my phone, calling, texting, Facebook Messenger, whatever, like, hey, hope you're doing well. My book just came out. I'm really excited about it. If you could take a glance at it, I really appreciate it. Like not copy and paste the same message to every single person, but like customizing to every person. And yeah, it took forever, but it was good, and my book did well. On its own terms, yeah, it's very hard for the book to be profitable. I had like a consultant that helped me and all this different stuff. And so I incurred expenses writing the book, but the amount of people I was able to connect with and kind of the impact that that's had has been way more than the money, that I spent. And so, yeah, I really appreciate that. Being an analog user, in a completely digital world, having some of those disciplines, I guess, still present is very powerful. Now, how has your family received this? If I can ask that.
Yeah, it's so funny. So I mentioned my son. His eyes are just so big. We're working on a children's book together too, because in school he wrote a little short story and his teacher loved it so much. And I don't know if she knows that I do this, but she sent a note home saying, I want him to build this into a children's book. So we're working on that this summer, which I'm so excited about. We're in research mode right now. It's about a honeybee, and so we were learning, we got books from the library. So of course, like my immediate family is super supportive and excited. My mom will order, like she could, like to your question about bulk ordering, she could order bulk through me through the printer, but she's off on Amazon just paying full price and buying a bunch and then handing them out on vacation. She's just like number one fan, as she always has been. And then my grandparents are my number one critics, which they always are. So they they're from a different generation too, and they said to when I saw them as soon as they had their copy, they said, we don't get it. My grandma said, I wanted this to be tied up in a bow. She loves a happy ending. And in my opinion, it is a happy ending, but she's looking for something different. She loves her like World War One, novels. I don't know how those are tied up in a bow, but maybe they are. And
My yeah, for sure. Yep.
yeah, she said, both of them said, we don't understand this book, and we don't, I don't think we've ever grieved, which made me really sad because I was like, I think you just don't, you push all your feelings down. And that's a whole other conversation. I'm not your therapist. I'm not anybody's therapist. But I said, I think maybe you're not my customer, and that's okay.
That's right. That's right. You can't make everybody happy. I mean, yeah, you can't please everybody, and no matter what you do, no matter how hard you try. And that, I mean, so don't let me get into stuff you don't want to talk about. But like being in school and like getting A's all the time and all that stuff, that kind of pressure is this very like, well, I have to make everybody happy all the time, right? And it's easy to get kind of locked into that. And I certainly used to be there. So you talked about getting B's, I got a B in the sixth grade and it like crushed my spirit. I was like, this is the worst day of my whole life. I absolutely couldn't deal with that. And of course, now I got over it, but I developed a completely different approach to life after that, because like, you know what? I'm not going to stress that much. It's going to be okay. Like I know the material. It doesn't matter to me. It's okay. I was a really good student, but I didn't beat myself up over grades, after that point. I was like, well, it's too late now. I can't get A's on everything for the rest of my whole life now because I've already had one B. And so you just have to kind of like adapt and move on. And so I would say that's a lesson of mine, from that time. It's just like, oh, can't make everybody completely happy. It's fine. And I'm glad that I learned that, when I did. That was thankfully something I picked up younger.
Yeah, I
But
wish I had absorbed that.
I mean, there are also different approaches to life, right? I can't tell everybody to do what I do. So, there is that too. But okay, so your family did well. Did you self-publish this book?
Yeah. So yes, and I have a publishing house because I want others to be able to tell their stories. And the focus is on West Coast stories told by Western artists. So apologies to anybody who doesn't live on the West Coast. I'm just like hugely passionate about that. And what I mean by that is the storyteller either has to have roots here or live here or have the subject of the book clearly show that it's in this area. And then if there's any art involved, matching them with an artist. I'm not just finding people on Fiverr, Upwork, all love to that, but it's not about the money as far as the right fit. I don't want to just feel like, oh, I have $5. And like you said, it is expensive, but I'm not going to just be like sacrifice on art because I want to save money on the book. I want to be able to support other people telling their stories and do it really beautifully. Like that goes back to the analog thing of not only is this story kind of this, I don't know, free verse, I guess, type story, but it has art from an artist who lives in Colorado. And that's about almost as far east as I go in terms of like matching artists together. And that's my intention too, is to be able to find these really incredible artists, whether it's through words or drawing, painting, whatever, to put together these projects that just feel so good to have on your table or in your hands.
Well, when you held it up, I mean, we're live transmitting right now, so it's a little bit pixelated. It's going to look great in the final version of this recording, and I'll be able to see it better. But I couldn't quite make out all the detail, but it looked like a really nice cover and everything, and so that's super cool. Now, is it something where, am I understanding correctly that you own the publisher? It's your publisher? Okay, okay, cool.
Yes, yes, yeah. So my company for that is called R West Press, and we're committed to telling stories from the West Coast. So that's yeah, the and the art in the story is really simple. I didn't want it to be a something that was a distraction from the story by any means, but I wanted it to have some visuals with it too so that it could appeal even to children and that it would give people moments of pause. And so to your question, I didn't think it would be worth my time to try to explain what this is. I thought it to somebody in like a pitching capacity of like, please buy the rights to my story. And I wanted to be able to keep more of the money so that I could invest it back into telling more stories on our terms. And this is kind of a different format. I was comparing it to a zine at first, but it's not exactly a zine because it's more of a book than magazine material, and zines look all sorts of different ways. But I didn't want it to be like, let me spend so much time finding the right place for this that I don't think exists. So why don't I just create my own? I kind of was inspired by Jay-Z for that when he started his own record company. Like, I'm just going to do it. And so I could use my time to really invest in the story and find the right artist and do that versus spend years reaching out to people to going back to perfectionism and performing. I didn't want to be picked. I decided to pick myself and make it happen. And I knew that I had the skills to do that. Is it going to be more work for me to go out and put it together and promote it and make it happen? Yes. Am I willing to do that work? Also, yes.
There's a really good book that I recommend a lot called Who Not How. It's by Dan Sullivan and another gentleman that I am forgetting his name right now, but uh, Who Not How. And it's about, not having to do every single thing yourself, right? Like, and so I have a team now. And that was very hard for me, right? Because like I like to control all the aspects, and it's like, well, this is what I want. And then you ask somebody else to do it and they don't do it exactly the way you do. And that's really challenging because why didn't you just do exactly what I would have done? And it's like, because they're a different person, And so how do you manage that? And so it's a really good book. It's not super long, but definitely encourage more people to read that, especially if you're trying to build something big, right? Because you can work yourself to the bone and get a little bit better, or you can have explosive growth of what you're trying to do because you delegate, you know?
And I have an assistant, so I'm not doing it all myself, but so for example, I'll think, and I'm a productive person, especially like as a business owner, as entrepreneurs, we just are that way. Like I'm here to push this thing forward. And even this, like, I can't delegate a podcast interview, but I could delegate, and this is what I want to be doing with my time. So I have her pulling together the lists of all the places that I want to reach out to. And then when I have an extra 5 minutes, instead of scrolling on Instagram, and sometimes I do that, but usually I don't, I'm putting together a pitch for them and I'm moving this project forward based on a beautiful tracker that she created for me, because my time is not well spent doing that. My time is better spent writing the pitch and reaching out meaningfully, so that, like, even if I had her do that, I don't want to get responses that I don't know about. It could be the perfect partner, but she's not the person who told the story and would be able to be a spokesperson for it. Maybe in the future I would get there, but right now I need that to be me. And so there's lots that I do delegate, but the certain points of like, this can only come from me, and that like meaningful outreach, I'm willing to spend more time. Even if I could automate it, delegate it, I choose not to.
You need to do the things that only you can do. And yeah, so you're already on the right track. I mean, that's wonderful. Now, we're, we've been talking. I want to respect your time and wrap up the show in a reasonable amount of time, but I also want to ask about your fiction book because we haven't gotten into that. And so, uh, I don't know if you're comfortable telling anything about that. I'm curious not only about the book and kind of what your vision is, but also, do you have another publishing, kind of model that you've got in mind for that? Are you going to use the same, the publisher that you've already got established? Are you going to do something else? Are you going to, put it on Kindle Direct? Are you going to, like, what are your thoughts? What are your plans for that? Or do you even have them at this point?
I haven't decided yet, and I don't know when the episode's going to come out, but part of what my intention is that this writing conference that I'm going to in Idaho at the end of the month, I've really hooked a lot to that because there's parts of me that I want to heal before I can move that next project forward. And it's probably 2/3 of the way done. I have a few holes that I want to fill, and it's so I went to college in Idaho, high school and college in Idaho too, and a large part of that book takes place in Idaho, which is why I want to make sure that I just have this really beautiful relationship with Idaho so that I can do it justice in this story. And most of it takes place in Seattle. So what's funny about it is the Little Grief book comes out of a time that I'm also talking about in that book. It's like therapy for me. So the novel is more of a coming of age story of a group of 20-year-olds starting their life in Seattle after graduating college in Idaho. And it's essentially wish fulfillment of how I wish these years of my life went with my dad. So it's fictional version of what happened with me. So not a memoir, but like these girls are going through life, and she's starting her career, and then she gets this news and she resents it because it's like, I'm starting my life and then I'm having to watch this life end. Now what? And then everything that happens around them. And it's it's really fun, and I don't think it's ready yet. That's why I'm like was saying the characters have to fully trust me, and I need to go back to Idaho before I can finish it. And I don't have like the publishing plans yet. I will probably publish it through my company again, because I want to be able to keep all of the money and reinvest it. And I already know that I have to do my own press tour anyway. So why would I give extra percentage to a publisher if they're not going to help me that much? Unless I go super viral on TikTok or something, and then they give me some huge upfront, I'm open to whatever. But, right now, my intention is to do that, and then I would have more formats. I'd probably put it on Kindle and all of that, but I haven't gotten that far.
Very, very cool. No, I'm excited. I'll be looking forward to that. I need to read your first book before I can read your second book, of course. But,
Yeah. Won't take you long.
Right. But it's a good thing to have. And especially, doing what we do and all that, that's a really good resource for us to have in our back pocket, so to speak, literally and figuratively, to have when maybe our clients are dealing with that sort of thing. Right. So that's a big deal. So now, Whitney, is there anything that I did not ask you today that you wish that I did ask you today? Anything else that you'd like to say?
Nothing that I wish you asked me. I've loved this conversation. One thing that I was thinking about in the intro that I do in my writing business is help people come up with I call them sparklers. So the fun, you said some of your guests don't have great bios. That's what I help people with too. So if they ever need someone to I find that people feel awkward talking about themselves and saying they don't think that some really cool facts about them are as cool as the rest of the world does. So that's some of what I do in my business when I'm helping other businesses tell their stories. It's like, let's get to know you first and figure out like what makes you special so that we can have these little elevator pitches where people are able to grab onto something. Like when I wrote the sweatsuit thing a long time ago, it is true. And then here I am sitting in a sweatsuit. I didn't even remember that I wrote that. And it's those things that are like, this is me in all my different capacities. And that's why I have to have the two, because I want the creative and I want the business part while infusing more creativity into business, because I had so many stodgy corporate experiences where I wasn't able to have as much fun and show as much personality. And so I'm really passionate about that with my company, which is called Popa and Associates. So if anybody needs that kind of support, I'm there for that. And then I'm going to be I have some other writers supporting me who write that way too, so that I can be off supporting the book. And yeah, and still there to like dip in and be like, hey, here's how this bio can be better, or like, let's find some more fun facts to weave into this thing or whatever. But I'll be off promoting the book a lot this summer too.
Sure. Now, if you would kind of tell us, like, if people were inspired by today's episode, where do they go to get your book? Where do they go to get updates about your next book, potentially, that kind of thing? Where do you want to send people after today's episode?
Yeah, the publishing house has a beautiful new website. I'd love if they visited it. It's at rwestpress.com, our house, OWR, Our West Press. And then my writing business is popaandassociates.com, and I am active on all the socials at Whitpopa, Popa. So you'll find me mostly on Instagram. That's where I like to hang out.
All right. You got it. Well, I really appreciate you taking your time to have this conversation with me. I know you've got a lot of things on your plate, a lot of things coming up. And so, very meaningful. I really enjoyed the conversation. So thank you so much.
Me too. And I appreciate this show and all that you're doing for people and in your business as well. So thank you, Luke, for creating the space and for having such a cool service.
Thank you. All right, everyone, that does it for today's episode. Thanks so much for being here. Be sure to subscribe to the channel for more episodes in the future, and I'll see you all again soon. Thank you so much for listening to The Price of Time, hosted by Luke Tatum. Subscribe to us for more episodes. Check the description box below to learn more about our guest. And if you found this episode valuable, please share it with a friend.